Good morning. We're running a couple of minutes late, so we'll get started. What are the actual individual returns of RPL, and does de-humanisation put this at risk? I'm Deb. I've been studying, working and consulting on RPL and skills recognition for 10 years across the globe. I'm currently undertaking my PhD on the effects of RPL for individuals. We together will share our progress on a global systematic review, gathering empirical evidence on the actual effects of RPL for individuals. I'm joined by Mona and Patrick Verquin. They are equally, if not actually more experienced, with RPL and skills recognition across 50 countries. We believe that you would be interested in this because we're looking at how the individual experiences recognition, and then that would be helpful to design systems of skills recognition. So there is a lack of empirical evidence on the effects of RPL for individual participants. We assume good things will happen for individuals who undergo the RPL process. Is this so? We assume good things. We know of no consistent national data collection on individual effects for people who acquire a credential or part thereof through a process, the recognition of prior learning. We know of no longitudinal studies that show the long-term effects of undergoing RPL process on individuals. Not being sure of the effects of RPL on individuals makes it difficult to not only warrant the offer of RPL, but it also makes it difficult to develop evidence-based policy, human-centred design and practice that may optimise the positive effects and avoid the negative effects to individuals. So we are conducting a global systematic review to find the actual effects of RPL on individuals as opposed to the potential or assumed effects. We found positive effects and negative effects, and we found what influences the bringing about of these effects. As independent RPL consultants, we are approached to evaluate RPL programs, policy, tools, and AI-powered tools as well. And we are concerned the meritorious direction in using digital tools to upscale RPL assessment may, by design, jeopardise the opportunity to realise the positive effects and, more concerning, affect harm. We will share and discuss ways technology can optimise positive effects and avoid negative effects. So this is the systematic review. It's a research process. I first checked that no systematic review has been done already, answering the questions. What are the effects of RPL on individuals? None has been. I applied the SPIDER approach to formulate the research question. We're looking at RPL candidates or graduates. The phenomenon of interest is recognition of prior learning and all the renditions of that throughout the world. I think there's 19 different acronyms. We're looking for research design that is empirical, tracer studies, candidate perspective, testimonies. And we're evaluating that data for RPL candidates' views, perspectives, attitudes. We're looking for qualitative, quantitative, mixed method research studies, no limits on dates, all people who undergo formal RPL in English, Portuguese, French and German. So far searched 4 databases. What I'm presenting today is the progress that we're up to on, I found 244 sources of those 4 databases. I've filtered in those studies that are relevant in terms of they tell us empirical evidence what is the effects to individuals of RPL. I've filtered in their voices and assessors' voices. I've filtered out any duplications I'm finding, any literature reviews. I've filtered out expert opinion, and there's a lot of it. I've filtered out theoretical discussions, and I'm analysing the data for what are the effects to individuals, positive and negative, and what helps and what hinders. and I'm calling them the influences. So, yes, we're only partway through the analysis. We may find new effects and new influencing factors. However, we are confident that these findings is an accurate big picture, because in view of our collective experience and fieldwork in and around RPL across 50 countries, we are not surprised with these results. I titled this slide 20 Reasons for RPL. After getting off the phone with a colleague, let's call him Jack. Jack had just organised and accompanied an Arab state delegation to Australia to understand best practice for national systems, TVET quality assurance and RPL. I asked him how the RPL study went. The delegation heard from Australia that RPL is extremely difficult to do on large scale and that there is mixed reports on the effectiveness. The delegation's response and sentiment was, well, why are we bothering? It's really disappointing to hear that. Here are 20 reasons why we bother. Before we look at briefly, these effects, I'd like to share this visual. What do we measure? National data collections may measure 3 of those 20 effects. In Australia, we only measure 1, reduced training time and/or costs. But as of 2016, this question was removed from our National Student Outcome Survey. So now we have the only statistical insight we have of the RPL effects to individuals is feedback forms from individual institutions. With over 3% of all TVET assessments being RPL, this insight would have been very valuable. Why does this matter that we don't have insight? This matters because if we don't know the effects, how can we rationalise the investment in RPL? How can we train for assessors? How can we rationalise any investment on providing it? Like the Arabian delegation said, why would we bother? Let's look briefly at these effects. I've categorised them into 4 areas: social, ability, psychological, economic. The most frequently mentioned economic effect for individuals is reduced training time and/or costs. Makes sense. Overall, RPL participants are time poor, mid-career, working full-time, mortgage, and so full-time study is just not an option. Time savings are more valuable to RPL participants than cost savings. Other economic effects are that their credential improves job prospects and increases remuneration. Interestingly, by engaging in the RPL process itself, improves career mobility as the person becomes more aware of the extent of their competencies. They then become more aware of the jobs that can use those skills. Job security improves with a credential as well. This is what the data is saying. Ability is an interesting finding, but not surprising for us. These effects are from being engaged in the RPL experience and the assessment process itself. Participants engage in professional reflective practice, usually not intentionally, but just part and parcel of backing up your claim. They gain the ability to analyse themselves as a learner, to unlearn, relearn, and to identify how they learnt and adapt that learning to different contexts. Some may call this skills literacy. The process strengthens organising skills, problem-solving skills, and writing skills. Many studies share instances of RPL impacting on academic persistence, completion, and performance. Going further and performing better academically because of going through the RPL process. In terms of psychological effects, this was by far the most common and valued effect for individuals. It was also the least expected effect, totally unanticipated. Many felt a sense of accomplishment and self-efficacy. With this sense of self-efficacy, strengthened confidence and self-esteem, many aimed higher in terms of their career aspirations and were more motivated and engaged for further formal learning. It had a positive effect on self-identity as a learner, but also as a professional. Many felt more professional after going through the process and receiving a credential. Some studies showed this impacted on work productivity and job satisfaction. Lastly, there is evidence of effects on individuals' social worlds, particularly for non-traditional learners or first-generation learners. A study with Maori learners in New Zealand found RPL graduates express themselves as a seed for others to follow. RPL is not all roses. There are negative effects as well. The most common negative effect is increased stress and anxiety and feeling isolated. Some feel inadequate or devalued and feel they are being treated unfairly. I myself found during my master's study that candidates' confidence was eroded during the process. So the assumption RPL improves confidence is not always so. The negative effects are usually during the assessment process. We have found no studies on whether these negative effects have lasting impact on individuals, but suffice to say, RPL can harm as well as hinder. So about half of the studies that I analysed also included insight into what helped or hindered those effects. What are the influencing factors? What brings about these positive effects? What brings about the negative effects? RPL does not inherently bring these effects. It's not a person going in, RPL magic, a person coming out and they have these effects. It's what happens in this black box. It's the implementation that matters. So we wanted to look at these influences, what happens in this black box, because we think as we design automated systems, including AI, we might look at those influencing factors and mimic the good ones and reduce the bad ones. Let's see if technology can do that, because if it cannot aid the individual in gaining the positive effects and avoiding the negative effects, what good is it? I looked for common themes in the study that provided insight into what helped or hindered the effects. Nearly all studies said positive effects were contingent upon the nature and degree of support and elaborated on the characteristics of that support. I'll share a summary soon. Peer support was mentioned frequently. It helps bring about positive effects and reduce negative effects, particularly the feeling of isolation, stress, and anxiety. Assessor and institutions' attitudes. Not surprising for me, as I found this in my master's study, but what was surprising is how often assessor's attitude was mentioned as causing negative effects and bringing a positive attitude, bringing directly responsible for positive effects. Processes. The way it is done and the processes used are large influences on positive and negative effects. Employer support. I won't go into this, but suffice to say, employer support helps in gathering evidence, but also helps to motivate initial enrolment in RPL. What does this look like, this human support that maybe technology could mimic? There is a thought bubble on each of the following 4 slides. We'd like to discuss these questions. Feel free to comment on any of the questions during discussion time. Nearly all studies that mentioned influencing factors mentioned the nature and degree of support. This brings into question what happens without human intervention, because oftentimes the positive effects, particularly psychological and improved abilities, are not the acquisition of a credential, but the effects of undergoing the process with a supportive human. Not only does human support impact during assessment, but research shows human support reinforces the positive effects and the negative effects throughout their entire education experience. Human support is also closely correlated with improved learning, learner identity, motivation, and engagement in further learning. These are the characteristics of human support that influences candidates' experience, causing or correlated with positive and negative effects. The process is difficult. Many give up, many disappear. Tutors' responses to wavering motivation impact persistence and success. So we're thinking about how can technology mimic this, and we can see, we know that AI can be a mentor or a cheer squad on the side. So this is what I would like you to think about as we're looking what humans do to bring about these positive effects of RPL, if they can be mimicked or done better by technology. All candidates need help just to get their head around RPL and then connecting evidence to their curriculum outcomes. It is a tough gig. In Australia, RPL tutors are not really a thing. Candidates just have the assessor. However, in many countries, a tutor, being a different person to the assessor, provides an advocacy and support role, and this makes a big difference to the candidate experience. Autonomous supportive support. Assessors, tutors do not do the portfolio for them. Rather, they guide a reflective process. It's this reflective process that brings about transformational change. Notably, a fully automated system of doing this, you will lose those, particularly the psychological effects. Ethically responsible support realises the harm you can affect and realise the ontological meaning attached to the process and outcome of RPL, particularly for non-traditional learners. It's an intimate process. Non-ethical practice may be not being responsive, not being flexible with assessment, not being objective with competency decisions, not engaging a robust method of assessment. These all influences the negative and positive effects and can cause harm. Competent assessors and tutors. They're objective, they have interpersonal skills, they create a safe and encouraging environment, they don't emphasise that this is an assessment, they are subject matter experts. This is an interesting finding. If the assessor is a subject matter expert, this impacts on the candidate's professional identity and confidence for career mobility. That discussion during assessment brings about those positive effects. Peer support. Many candidates feel isolated, especially if they are not connected with others going through the RPL process. Other RPL students are a valued source of support. Being a member of a group with similar background adds to the feeling of self-awareness and worth. Group learning can transform negative learner identity to positive. And together, studies did show that they make new knowledge. Having peer support also improves likelihood of completion. Lastly, this is where I can see technology or dehumanising the process can actually help. Many studies show how the assessor's views or beliefs in RPL impact on candidate experience and even success or failure. I'm going to talk about anti-RPL attitude. Some just don't believe in RPL. Some do not engage a quality assured process. They can smell competency, or you just know. This does not always bode well for candidates. Sometimes assessors will over-assess and add their own criteria. Methods may not be consistent across candidates. This causes harm for candidates. Whether the assessor has been allocated reasonable time to attend to RPL candidates impacts their experience. Many times RPL is just tacked onto the job role of a staff member that is already working already has a full workload. This happens quite often. This anti-RPL attitude at institutional level exacerbates the problem, because when institutions do not believe in RPL, even though they have an RPL policy, there is lack of professional development available for assessors and they remain incompetent. The process. The RPL approach can influence its effects on individuals. This is the main. The process can make it harder or easier, and that influences psychological effects such as feelings of self-efficacy. Processes that influence the effects of RPL on individuals: flexible assessment versus standardised tests such as written tests. Readiness, workshop opportunities to master academic skills, reduces fear of failure and causes positive psychological changes. I'm working with a tech company at the moment, and we are creating an AI-powered RPL tool, and they miss this part completely, the pre-readiness of engaging and building a rapport with the candidate, getting them ready to undergo the RPL assessment. It cannot be overstated, this readiness that needs to be designed into any system of RPL. Self-reflection. With the process, when the process requires candidates to organise their own knowledge, even we saw some drop-down menus that I can choose from, or do I start from scratch, a blank slate? The data shows that the blank slate with guided reflection works better because they're thinking about their life and they feel more self-efficacy at the end. I did this. This belongs to me. These are my words. That's my narration. The 4 questions. Can dehumanised processes mimic human support? Can dehumanised processes do better? Can dehumanising the process improve anti-RPL attitude? What's the opportunity for tech-enabled processes? What is the risk of tech-enabled processes? Can dehumanised interventions mimic peer support?
I think I would stay seated, it's easier. But before we start into the discussion, we would like to give you some input on what AI can actually do, or what is already shown in different tests, in labs, in projects, so that you can get some ideas. Yeah. So we are changing the perspective from the question of how the benefits of RPL can be maintained when supported by AI, and how disadvantages that may arise during the RPL process can be mitigated. So to where can AI support the candidate during the RPL process? Slightly change of perspective here. And based on a literature review, we have identified the various transactions that a candidate typically goes through during the RPL process. And building on this, we searched for scientific experience tests, literature reviews, and projects in which educational processes can be supported by AI. And we would like to briefly present these to you before we go into the discussion. And I would like to have a look with you at the different studies we found, and that are, most important, individualized, yes. So we already see that there are different studies proving that personalized learning support is possible on AI-based systems. So we see this due to open educational resources. We see this with different game designs, and all those kind of things, working with avatars, working with chatbots. So they are all there to support learning processes and to make it a bit more personalized. We also see this already in career-orientated suggestions, just as we've in the earlier session actually, where we've seen how ChatGPT can already help us to figure out what kind of competences, strengths we might have, and matches those to different kind of jobs, or as we've seen, kind of other criteria based on existing standards. We've already seen that in different studies that holistic evaluation is possible. So feedback not only comes from the teachers, but also from mentors, coaches, peers, and AI. And these are brought together in this very nice study from Guo, Pan, Li, and Lai, where the effects of an AI-supported approach of peer feedback, they were really relevant. So they had a big influence. And but also some critics, for instance, saying that sometimes the peers were not as nice as the assessor in the end. So they were a bit too critical. So, so it's very interesting how they are working on those results. Very interesting, but still a bit far away in a look into the future, recording emotions and behavior. So it's already possible to performance states are recognized by facial expressions and eye movement to support students in self-reflection. So this is already possible. This is a lab study. This will be published only next year. But really interesting to see how this can help the candidate to get for the candidate matching motivation input. So after the AI analyzed the emotions and the behavior, and then he's getting matching input to continue his studies or his learning process. What we've already seen as well is that supporting personal development, so promoting future skills, personal development in alignment with personal life goals, is possible due to AI. and also promoting motivation. So I think a lot of us may have already used language learning applications, so there we see it very nicely. So we don't want to end the streak. So we're doing a bit every day. So we're getting badges, we are getting little points so that we can use extra learning content, for instance. And this is already on the run and is working really well. So there are significant findings that this is already working for us. And a last point that's, I think, also very interesting is that it's supporting assessment. The key finding of the study from Heil and Iftenthaler was that the key findings show that a formative online assessment, especially peer and automated assessments, improve learning processes by boosting motivation, engagement, and self-reflection. And the success factor includes aligning assessments with course goals, using clear rubrics, providing timely feedback, and incorporating real-world tasks. So in fact, these are a lot of things that are already happening and going on, and that can support candidates during the RPL processes. I want to make a quick lead to a quick focus on something that Deb said earlier, was presenting earlier, the risk of isolation during the RPL process, and how can we answer to this point. And we've seen that people are reacting really well to avatars, they're reacting really well to chatbots if they are humanized, if they're looking a bit human-like. And another very interesting study I found was that learning videos made by humans gave a slightly better learning experience than learning videos produced by AI. So I think that was still significant, but the researchers said it's getting smaller. So AI is getting better and better, even to develop learning videos that can match personal, individualized learning processes. And now we are having a quick look on the challenge and limits, and then we'll start into the discussion. These are the findings from a French study. And they are saying it's really important that even though we use AI, the maintenance of the human and empathetic aspects, which are essential, we have to ensure the protection of the candidate's personal data, really relevant point. Also, so that the candidate is more willing up to give personal information so that the processes can really match what they need. And we need to ensure that AI remains a tool in the service of the consultant assessors and is not used as a replacement. So far, I'm curious what the findings will say in about 5 or 10 years, but we'll see. For the moment, these are the points we found. And now I would like to give back to Patrick and going into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Anybody wants to react either on the speech before the two speeches, or start to respond or open the discussion about any of the question? We had in mind to do groups, and then we realized it would not be possible given the setting of the room and the time. So I suggest you pick up, if you're interested, a question, and then we stay on it. When it's done, we move to another one, okay? So we don't go back and forth. Thank you so much.
So it sounds like there's a lot broken in the human process. So given that the human part is the really important part, surely it would be better to invest in the human part? So these tools are fine, but they're flawed. So we know that humans can actually become emotionally attached to chatbots. If the chatbot changes, there's an issue. We know they can say some horrific things to people that are in mental distress that actually cause further mental distress. So I'm kind of going, why when it's human, and why not just invest in the human instead of a lot of money in tech, which currently isn't robust enough to provide the kind of service that we value a human providing?
Great question. Yeah, the big why. From my point of view, upscaling RPL, that is what's driving the digitisation of it. But perhaps there was someone up the back with their hand.
So this is kind of I'm a big supporter of technology and see high value in it. I guess my question is around dehumanizing the process, improve anti-RPL attitude. Did you find in the research sort of reflections or findings that suggested that if the experience with the AI might be more positive, that there might be room for using that knowledge to improve training for APL advisors to help them humanize in a different way as opposed to being anti-RPL? A bit of a convoluted question, but wondering if the research might also suggest opportunities for helping to improve on the human side the quality of the RPL experience.
In terms of improving the humans that are interacting with the candidates, it depends on your country. Australia, we don't do that at all. Actually, we do not even acknowledge that RPL assessment is an advanced assessment skill, that there is interpersonal skills that you need. It's around also gathering the data. I mean, we've looked for the data to say this is a personal thing. There is psychological impact to people, but it was very difficult to find that. So there's no research or broad research to say this is how we're impacting people. And once we know that, then we can train our humans to respond to that in terms of AI.
Yeah.
Wait,
And
I have several in line. Oh, sorry, Mona, go ahead.
I just want to add, Deb also presented that there's the economic point of view really strongly addressed. And I think this is the main reason why AI is coming into the field.
I just wanted to comment on the use of the term dehumanized as quite a binary way of putting things. I remember in the early days of badges, there was a lot of binaries between either its badges or its degrees, or either you're doing small things or you're doing large things. And I think when we realized most things are both and, then usually we end up with better results. And I wondered whether like a switch in the language here might help it be less of a binary.
We were struggling a lot about this word. We were focusing a lot on AI, and then realized sometimes it's just removing human from the process that has effects on individuals. So that's why we say dehumanizing. But we would take any suggestions.
Thank you. It's Wendy. One of the things that I found, and I'm talking also from having gone through an RPL process a couple of times, is that where there was a huge amount of friction was just the sheer bureaucratic processes. So I'm wondering whether there's value in separating it out and saying, can we keep the humans where the humans add value? And can we use AI and automation where it really is just process and procedure, but also how can you build something in that enables people to maybe nominate how they want to be helped? There was a very interesting study, and I can't remember who did it recently, but it was saying many university students would prefer an AI coach because an AI coach doesn't judge, it's available 24/7. There's a whole range, and I'm just wondering whether there's that you could build the option of what people want to deal with into it.
I just wanted to basically completely agree with those comments and say that, I mean, one of the issues about the whole threat of AI removing people out of jobs is assuming that that it can replace the whole human experience. And the reality is, if you really want to basically automate your processes, you've got to get down to a task and context level, and it's about automating the tasks that can be automated, and then the human element basically can be elevated and amplified rather than actually removed. And so to do that, you've actually got to drill down to the economics of the RPL process and remove the process and bureaucratic components and actually increase the efficacy of the human element. So I don't think it's an either or, it's an and the problem is that to do it, you've really got to drill down to actually what is the established processes in it and do it at a task level.
I might add to that, Yasmin, that this type of study allows us to make those decisions, allows us to know where we need humans to do better, where we can use AI to do better. Yeah, but we don't know without the research. We're just guessing.
Hi, my name's Catherine. Deb and I know each other really well from Australia. Just 2 points. I think when any organisation is using AI, they need to follow the guidelines of their AI within their organisation, whether it be for RPL learning, like whatever that is. So I think UNESCO have some really good guidelines for AI in education if you don't feel like your institution's guidelines are good enough. So I'd highly recommend you have a look at that because, we want to make sure that they are rich processes. And then as an employee you might need to be able to follow those guidelines if you are helping candidates with RPL.
Just to pick up on the and different ways of looking at it, I think for the anti-RPL attitudes on the institutional side, AI can be used to better rationalize programs and perhaps improve the outcomes that people are trying to match to. So I think it's a sort of a 180 that's possible there.
Absolutely. On this particular point, on this particular third question, we have to insist that we focused on the impact for individuals. And what is missing here, and what is the next step, is for the system. You know, how the system could improve, how AI could improve the system for welcoming more people, for helping distance learners, distance candidates, for fighting against plagiarism. There are many, many other, but we really focused on the effect for individuals applicant, for individual applicant.
I think that's why there is merit in using or chasing technology to improve the outcomes, to expand access, to allow more people to be recognised for what they know and can do. And that's where I feel quite excited, where technology can expand and make RPL more accessible to more people and improve more lives and empower more people.
So question I have is really getting to the system, and I appreciate it was more about the effect on people. But having worked in the RPL world as an academic assessor, it was always a shame that micro-credentials, for example, or badges weren't considered as part of the PLAR process, the RPL process. Did you find anything in your research, exemplars or otherwise, that you could point to and highlight that are using those type of credentials to improve the RPL process, which, frankly, AI could probably help with too in terms of mapping and so on. But any information along those lines?
Can you explain how to use to credit non-formal learning towards formal learning, being a micro-credential? Is that
Yeah. I give you an example. In the military, they've done a lot of wonderful work with developing credentials, micro-credentials and the like, that academic institutions are recognizing for both admission and transfer. Even though it is not formal learning in the academic setting. So there would be a great example of exemplar work. Did you encounter anything like that? Because I think the other thing about process is the process may be broken for other reasons beyond the human sitting in the room. It could be the policies, et cetera.
No, I didn't particularly find that. I've worked in the UAE in the military, and that's exactly what we were doing. We were mapping the military training to civilian qualifications to enable their resettlement into civilian jobs. That mechanism of mapping non-formal to formal, that certainly is an area where we can use a system to make that faster and therefore much more accessible for more people, absolutely. And we saw that a little bit today before, how we were mapping our conversation with two taxonomies, the ESCO and the ONET. It's there to use. Yep.
Hi. we're using AI in terms of, I'm actually rewriting a certification program at the moment, which is global. And so what we're now using AI for is to be able to translate into language, so that where we see that the student is having trouble, or the RPL learner is having trouble in being able to prove through reflection, that the AI bot will kick in and will be able to help them in language to be able to better understand, set them up, and then they go back to finishing the RPL process. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to equal out RPL globally with AI technology.
I agree.
Last over there.
Yeah, so there's an underlying assumption here around access to digital tools, the ability to actually be able to afford to use them in terms of data access and digital capabilities kind of underlie all of this, given that there's massive digital inequalities even within what we'd consider rich countries. Do we not risk actually isolating people further by going down this route?
There was a study in Ireland that did that and found that it was a barrier for those with low digital literacy in Ireland.
Okay, thank you. I would love to talk to you about the French system, because we do not connect non-formal and informal in the French system directly. We use the qualification standards, and they're all the same, however we assess people. We just go through the standards, and we disregard, we don't really consider whether it's formal, informal, non-formal. We don't look at it, but we don't have time. I realize we don't have time.
Thank you.